in late fall of 2023, we went down to Clemson University's Coastal Research and Education Center for a Brassica Field Day. And Dr. Sandra Branham, I think you put that together, and you are a vegetable breeding and geneticist specialist. So what was the purpose of Field Day?
So this Field Day was brought together as part of the work of my PhD student, Kushwinder Kaur. She had gotten a Southern Stayer graduate student grant to fund looking at the diversity of the collards and kale and cabbage, and we had almost 300 different varieties at the Field Day, 100 of which were from the Collard Collection that these gentlemen helped obtain for the USDA Seed Bank.
And Dr. Mark Farnham, you were down at the Coastal Center but with the USDA and not Clemson, and your specialty was?
My specialty for 30 years with the USDA was breeding and genetics of the Brassica family, and so collard green was the Brassica of local importance that I chose to work on over the years.
And Dr. Powell Smith, you were like me, a Clemson Extension Agent for a while, and over in Lexington County. And Powell, talk about the incredible importance of Lexington County in fresh market collards and brassicas, leafy greens.
Well, they're the leader in our state for sure, and I found out from Dr. Branham this morning that their state's now the #1 state in production past Georgia. So Lexington County is the home of a lot of the fresh market production, although collards are produced in each of our counties.
Okay.
And in some form, either commercially, small commercial, roadside gardeners and farmers, that sort of thing. But Lexington and Calhoun are the seat of the commercial production. Calhoun with processing and Lexington with fresh market, and we produce a complete variety of leafy brassicas there.
And you've got a good description of why we have field days, what people go there for.
Well, field days are educational events where we show outdoor plots so that the farmers can actually see the crop growing, because one of our famous extension personnel of the past, Seaman Knapp, said that a lot of people won't believe what they hear. Some people don't believe what they see, but rare is the man that won't believe what he does. So that's the basis of us doing demonstrations and field days and that sort of stuff, so growers can actually see it in a hands-on manner.
And you brought a lot of people down for that. It was well attended, and people were fascinated. But one thing, if you're going to do plant breeding, you can't just have two things, only two plants, two collard greens, because you need a lot of genetic material, I believe.
Mm-hmm. So when you have a new polymerase, you don't know if you're going to have the genetics to combat that problem. And so when there's a new one, you don't know what you need until you need it.
Gosh, and I think you two had a fascinating trip. Tell us what y'all did to try to bring a lot more diversity into the seed collection.
Well, we knew, I knew early on, and with Powell's actually help, we knew that there were seed savers, primarily at first in South Carolina. We had identified several people that save collard seed. And
you mean just backyard vegetable growers?
Mostly backyard vegetable growers. And when we encountered these people, we always asked for seed, and people were always kind enough to give it to us. Starting in around 2002, we went through the process of going through what we would call a formal exploration, a domestic exploration, and we got some funding with the USDA, and with a couple colleagues in Virginia, we hit the road and went looking for diversity in the collard patches around the Carolinas.
And Powell, you know, most people, when their collards bolt or go to seed, then they say, well, that's over with. That you had to wait and go around when that happened, because that's how you could get some seeds, right?
Well, Mark and I discovered that was how to tell somebody was a seed saver. You're driving around February and there's nothing basically in the fields, and then all of a sudden you see a row of collards blooming beside somebody's house, about 8 or 10 plants.
Yeah.
And might look at Mark and say, yep, there's a patch. So we would stop and talk to the individual. We met some very interesting individuals, and all seed savers just about have a story with their seeds, so we got to record those stories and that type of thing. And we did find there were some lines that we seemed to see here and there that were that popular, that they were different ones, obviously, because they were in different growers' hands, but there was still a similarity in the type of collard we were seeing. So Mark and the guys from Virginia actually went into North Carolina. I didn't get to go onto that part of the trip because I had other things to do, but they found even more up there.
And I thought it was interesting what you just said, Powell, that you had several people, there were some varieties that seemed popular that you found in multiple places, but I looked at the genetics of all 100 of these collard varieties, and none of them are identical.
No,
So they're all different,
yeah.
even if they started the same,
Yeah.
they've become different.
That's fascinating. Are you doing some actual research now on some of these?
Yes, so I've used the whole collection. There's a disease that's really, really problematic for our growers, and it's called bacterial leaf blight. And it's caused by a bacteria that there's nothing that can be sprayed for it.
Whoa.
Once you have it in the field, you just have to harvest as fast as you possibly can before it spreads. So the best way to combat this is going to be to find some resistance to the disease. So I've screened the entire collection along with my collaborator, Pat Wechter, and we found and Mark, obviously. We found 2 accessions that were significantly resistant out of the entire 100.
Whoa.
And no commercial varieties were resistant.
So we also looked at some other things on that wonderful field day. Tell us, there was a lot of stuff we got to go and taste. What was that?
Oh, the mustard green field, okay, yes. So we had another field where we are looking at, again, resistance to bacterial leaf blight. So we have a field, you guys were eating the ones that hadn't been sprayed, but some of them had been sprayed with bacteria to see if they were resistant or not.
That's cool.
And so we had our resistant varieties out in the field along with the commercial susceptible cultivars. And we were letting you try one of our releases that we're going to do for Charleston broadleaf is very spicy, so it's kind of fun to eat.
Yeah, there was a lot of, the taste was real different. And I think the taste among collards is different too. Paul, what's your favorite?
I like the Morris heading type collard, and that was one of the types that, like Dr. Branham said, the genetics were different, but you know, the people called them heading collards, and that was one of the popular things that we would see when we went on our seed searches. A lot of people had a favorite heading collard, but I do like Morris heading. It's got a nice flavor.
How about you, Mark?
I favor what's called a yellow cabbage collard, which pretty prevalent type in eastern North Carolina, and has a very nice mild taste to it, and it's very tender. I like it.
And I think partially as a result of what y'all did, and I guess through the USDA, now home vegetable gardeners can get some of these older varieties and pick ones that they particularly like, try a lot of different ones out.
So there's a company called Southern Exposure Seed Exchange, and they have, I believe, about 20 different of these heirloom varieties that were collected that are available for purchase.
I was so excited that you invited us to come, because first of all, just to see all this variety growing out there and the different types of people who'd come to learn about it, from people who just had a backyard garden to these huge growers, Powell, like some of the ones that you had worked with previously. And of course, we ended up, if you want people to really be happy, don't you need to feed them?
Right. So the meal was actually sponsored by Peculiar Pig Farms and Chef B.J. Dennis. And I've been doing a lot of work with Chef B.J. Dennis. He's a Gullah chef, and he is the one who let me know that we just talked about there are these varieties, the heirlooms, that you can purchase through Southern Exposure Seed Exchange. And he let me know that none of them are the South Carolina ones.
Oh my goodness.
So we've been working together to try to maybe change that and make those available to people.
Yeah. Powell, you have any final thoughts about the day and the things and importance?
Well, I like to see field days and see, I've got enough grower in me, I guess. I like to see the way the crops perform under different conditions. And right after we finished the collection, I think 2 years afterwards, Mark and I had an opportunity to go to Cornell, New York, to one of their experiment stations for another meeting. And they just so happened the Brassica station there, that's where the Brassica seed edible is stored, and they had planted out a good portion of that, including the recent ones that we had brought from South Carolina. And they were on vacation. They loved that soil up there in New York because they were much more vigorous and attractive than some of the sandier soils I'd seen them growing in the Southeast.
Yeah.
So it's always good to have a field day to be able to see some of those kind of differences.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And Mark, how about you?
I would think that I was excited like you at that field day, as much because 20 years ago when we went out, myself and Powell and Ed Davis and John Morgan from Virginia, we didn't really know if we did collect it, and which we ultimately did over almost 100 accessions of collards. We didn't know how important they might be in the end. So for me, it was very heartwarming to have Sandra growing out those 100 collard greens that we, carefully collected so many years ago, and knowing that that material could be of use now.
And Sandra, I would think that with the changes in climate that we're seeing, there may be new diseases and things coming in, and so this could be very important for South Carolina growers.
I'm very grateful that they went on this trip and collected this variety, all these different types, because without it, I wouldn't have the material I need to breed to combat all these problems we have coming up.
Well, I can't wait for you to do another one, and I'm going to be sure to bring some pepper vinegar, because I like to put pepper vinegar on my collards, so I'll bring that for lunch. How about that?
Sounds great.
Thank y'all so much for coming, and thank you for organizing that day and for all the research that y'all did that made it possible.